Tampa, Florida. The summer of 1965 arrived heavy and slow, pressing heat down onto the streets until even the air seemed to shimmer. The bay smelled of salt, the cicadas screamed through the afternoons, and sunlight glared off the white walls of St. Gabriel's Parish. It was the kind of place where everyone knew one another, where life followed the rhythm of choir bells. Until one morning, when Sister Mary Clement disappeared, and peace was gone. She was 27, new to the parish, and instantly adored. Quiet, graceful, with a face that seemed born for compassion, she had arrived from Savannah in March to assist Father Patrick O'Malley. Parishioners praised her kindness, the way her presence softened a room. She taught catechism, cared for the sick, and stayed late into the night polishing the wooden pews. To most, she was an embodiment of faith itself, too pure for the ordinary world. On August 12th, everything changed. At sunrise, the convent's hallway was silent. Sister Agnes noticed Mary's empty bed, sheets neatly folded, Bible open on the nightstand. Her shoes and crucifix were missing, though nothing else was disturbed. At first, no one panicked. Sister Mary often walked early along the bay to pray. But when she missed Mass, whispers began. Father O'Malley called the police by midday. Officers searched the gardens, the rectory, even the riverbanks, yet found nothing. Her belongings were untouched, no sign of a struggle, no indication she'd left willingly. That night, the parish gathered inside St. Gabriel's Chapel, candles flickering against the stained glass. Some prayed. Others murmured theories. Had she fallen ill, run away, been taken? The priest urged calm, insisting she would return. Yet his tone betrayed unease. The report filed that week read, female, 27. Missing person. No evidence of foul play. And with that, the city moved on. Weeks passed, and the trail went cold. No witnesses, no new leads. Rumors grew bolder. Some said Sister Mary had been torn between her vows and worldly affection. Others believed she'd stumbled upon secrets within the parish that someone wanted buried. The police found no proof of either story, and eventually, the file was closed. Father O'Malley requested transfer to another church. Sister Agnes left for Alabama. The old parish remained, but those who'd known her said its spirit dimmed. Years faded into decades. By the 1980s, few remembered her name. The convent was sold, its stories replaced with office chatter and humming air conditioners. Her disappearance became folklore, a ghost tale mothers whispered to children on stormy nights. The world forgot. Tampa grew. Then, 60 years later, the ground finally gave up its secret. In early 2025, a development crew broke earth where the rectory once stood. On the third morning of excavation, a metal shovel struck wood. Workers unearthed a small box, sealed with rusted nails and wrapped in decaying cloth. When opened, the air filled with the scent of earth and mildew. Inside lay a fragment of a nun's habit, a broken rosary, and a small leather-bound journal. Detectives arrived by noon. DNA tested on the fabric matched surviving members of the Clement family. For the first time in 60 years, Sister Mary's name left the archives and returned to headlines. The case, long dormant, breathed again. The journal's early entries were gentle reflections on faith, notes about students, confessions of doubt, sketches of the bay. But the tone shifted midsummer. Her words became urgent. Phrases about fear, about late-night footsteps outside her door, about something she'd witnessed that threatened to undo the sanctity of this house. The final entry, dated August 11th, read, "If I disappear, tell them it was not by choice." That line changed everything. Reporters flooded Tampa. Elderly parishioners gave interviews, their memories fragile but vivid. Some recalled tension between Father O'Malley and Sister Mary weeks before she vanished. Others remembered hearing an argument echo through the convent one night. Investigators followed old records, uncovering gaps in the parish accounts from that summer. Hundreds of dollars missing from the church treasury. Strange details resurfaced. The hurried transfer of Father O'Malley, a letter from Sister Mary to the bishop's office that was logged but never filed. By June, The diocese released internal correspondence admitting that Sister Mary's complaint, accusing another clergyman of financial misconduct, had existed. It had vanished the same week she did. Forensic teams resumed excavation at the rectory. Digging 3 feet deeper, they uncovered partial skeletal remains. The bones, delicate and brittle, belonged to a woman estimated in her late 20s. DNA confirmed the match within weeks. Tampa now had its answer. What locals had whispered for years was true. Sister Mary hadn't left. She had been buried beneath the very foundation of St. Gabriel's. Detective Linda Carver, leading the modern inquiry, faced a wave of press cameras. Her statement was simple. She tried to expose a truth that others wanted hidden. That truth cost her life. Her words cut through the city's humid air like a blade. For many who had grown up attending St. Gabriel's, it felt like an awakening and an indictment. The Archdiocese of St. Petersburg issued an apology days later. "We failed her," the statement read. "Her courage was greater than our protection." Public memorials followed. Candles lined the church steps, crowds murmured prayers, and someone hung a single photograph of her smiling beside a group of children she once taught. For the first time since that August morning, her name was spoken openly, no longer in shame or secrecy, but as part of Tampa's collective reckoning. When the investigation closed, the city held a vigil by the bay. The air was warm like every Florida evening, but the tone was quiet, reverent. As twilight fell, the bells of St. Gabriel's, unrung for over 2 decades, tolled softly across the water. Their echo rolled over the city like a sigh. For 60 years, her truth had been buried under silence, fear, and faith twisted by power. Yet in the end, truth endured. The Florida night felt different that evening. Not cooler, not lighter, but righteous in its stillness. The summer she vanished was finally over. The chest found beneath the old rectory was small and sealed with rusted nails, its wood darkened by decades underground. When investigators opened it, the air filled with the scent of rot and earth. Inside lay a fragment of cloth, a broken rosary, and a journal whose ink had almost faded. Its cover was soft with age, its pages thin and trembling. Every word inside belonged to Sister Mary Clement, the woman Tampa had spent 60 years trying to forget. Detective Linda Carver was assigned to lead the case. She'd handled dozens of cold cases, but this one felt heavier. Faith and crime mixed poorly. She studied the journal for hours, its words both fragile and purposeful. The last entry made her pause. "If I disappear, tell them it was not by choice." The strokes were uneven, the ink smudged, but the message was clear. It wasn't resignation, it was courage. The first clues pointed toward Father Patrick O'Malley, Mary's superior at St. Gabriel's parish. His name appeared again and again in the journal, always tinged with unease. "He fears discovery," she wrote once. Another entry read, "He watches me too closely." By the final pages, suspicion had turned into certainty. "He knows I've spoken." Linda felt a chill reading those lines. She requested O'Malley's records from the church archives. The man had died in 1989, buried quietly in Jacksonville after what official notes described as nervous decline. His transfer from Tampa had been abrupt, just 2 months after Mary vanished. But there was no mention of an investigation, nor any report acknowledging her disappearance. The deeper Linda looked, the clearer the pattern became. Pages missing, files marked confidential. The church had closed its own eyes decades ago. Then, in a misplaced folder, she found something extraordinary. A letter dated August 5, 1965, a week before Mary vanished. It was written by Sister Mary herself, titled Formal Report of Financial Misconduct. In tidy cursive, she accused O'Malley of stealing parish funds. Beneath that, faint pencil read, "There are moral matters involved. Others know." The page had never been processed. Someone had hidden it. When that discovery broke in the media, Tampa erupted. The mystery of Sister Mary's disappearance became a national story again. Crowds formed near the ruins of St. Gabriel's, laying flowers where the rectory once stood. Older parishioners stared at the site as if expecting her ghost to appear. For many, This wasn't scandal, it was reckoning. Forensic analysis connected everything. The cloth in the chest matched materials used for convent habits in the 1960s. Blood and bleach traces lined the fibers, suggesting an attempt to clean evidence. Then came a breakthrough. A retired groundskeeper named John Rivera came forward. He was 84, frail but lucid. "I remember what I saw," he said quietly. "He told me to fill a hole behind a rectory. Said it was drainage work. There were no pipes, just earth." Linda listened, her stomach tightening. Rivera wiped his eyes. "I should have said something. I thought it was God's business to judge, not mine." Soil samples from that area confirmed Rivera's memory. Lime, calcium, and traces of formaldehyde beneath the foundation. Excavations resumed at dawn the next day. The crew dug carefully, each motion heavy with tension. By dusk, someone called out softly, "Found something." From the dark soil, they lifted bone fragments and pieces of decayed cloth. Forensic testing confirmed the truth everyone already knew. They belonged to Sister Mary Clement. When Linda faced the press, microphones crowded the podium. Her voice was measured but resolute. "Sister Mary uncovered corruption within her parish," she said. She tried to speak, and she was silenced. Her courage lasted 60 years in silence, but today it speaks again. Flashbulbs cracked through the air. Behind her, the city stood still. The diocese issued a statement days later, an apology that sounded both sorrowful and inadequate. "We grieve for our sister," it read, "and for the silence that failed her." For many, it was too little, too late. The city organized a memorial service at the site of St. Gabriel's. A marble stone was placed where the chest had been found, engraved simply with her name and 4 words from her journal: "Not by choice." Truth endures. Hundreds gathered that evening, clergy, retired officers, people who had never even met her. They stood shoulder to shoulder as the priest's voice trembled with emotion. "Her faith made her brave," he said. "Our fear made her disappear." The service ended as the sun dipped behind the bay. The old church bell, recovered from storage, was struck once. The sound lingered in the humid air, low and haunting, as if carrying her voice across the water. Linda stayed behind after the crowd dispersed. The site was quiet, but alive with memory, the flicker of candles, the murmur of waves. She knelt near the memorial, her thoughts heavy and respectful. "You were right," she whispered. "Someone heard you after all." The air was warm, the light fading from gold to ash. Somewhere nearby, night insects began their steady hum. She imagined Sister Mary's final moments, the struggle between fear and faith, and thought of how many times truth had been buried beneath obedience. For the first time since that long summer in 1965, Tampa no longer looked away. The case was closed, but something deeper had opened, the acknowledgement of silence itself. Faith had not saved Sister Mary, but it had preserved her words. When Detective Carver left the site, the faint echo of the bell followed her down the quiet street. Wind rippled through the palms, rustling like whispered prayers. 60 years too late, justice had finally come, not in punishment, but in truth. And beneath that cross, her story could finally rest. By the time Tampa woke to the morning headlines, the city had changed. Sister Mary Clement was no longer a footnote in a forgotten case. She had become the face of a reckoning, one that reached beyond her disappearance to the heart of what silence had protected. The discovery of her remains sent ripples through every parish across Florida, sparking old fears, old guilt, and finally, long overdue truth. Detective Linda Carver became the reluctant spokesperson of that truth. Exhausted but unwavering, she addressed reporters under a pale bay sky. "We found not only Sister Mary's body, but evidence of systemic concealment. The silence wasn't accidental, it was structural." Her voice carried steady, though she hated the necessity of it. She wanted this story to end quietly, with peace, not spectacle. But the city wouldn't let go. Church officials announced an internal investigation. The diocese opened sealed archives dating back to the 1950s, revealing patterns that mirrored what had happened at St. Gabriel's. Sudden transfers, unanswered complaints, carefully worded reassurances. Every new revelation deepened public outrage. Church members who had defended O'Malley now stood before cameras, torn between disbelief and remorse. "We trusted him," one elderly parishioner said. "He taught us faith. How do we face that now?" In the evenings, the memorial site filled with visitors. Families brought children who had never known the story. They lit candles, said prayers, and left handwritten notes tucked between the stones. The words were simple: "Forgive us. We remember you. You kept faith." Even atheists visited, drawn not by religion, but by something purer: the endurance of conscience. Linda often returned, long after the cameras left. She'd sit by the water and reread the photocopies of Sister Mary's journal. Each sentence seemed heavier now, as if the paper itself remembered how long it had waited to be heard. "Obedience without truth is not faith," one entry read. Another said, "One day, the bells will ring again." The words lingered in Linda's mind. Bells would ring again. But for what? Regret? Restoration? She didn't know. But she understood what they meant for Sister Mary. Faith wasn't silence. It was defiance wrapped in devotion. Inside the Tampa Police Department, the case officially closed. But Linda's instincts told her something remained uncovered. One evening, she combed through old evidence logs and found a torn letter fragment from 1965, barely a few lines long, but dated 2 days before Sister Mary vanished. It was addressed not to O'Malley, but to another clergyman, a visiting bishop. The final word stopped her cold: "He is not alone." The file offered no context, no explanation, only that haunting phrase, "not alone." It hinted at someone else involved, perhaps another protector of O'Malley's secret. Linda brought the letter to her supervisor, who glanced once and sighed. "Everyone responsible is long gone," he said. "The truth is enough." But the truth rarely stays buried for long. That week, Linda received an anonymous call. A man's voice, low and steady, told her he once worked in the parish archives. There was a second letter, he said, one they locked away in the bishop's safe. He gave her a date, August 13, 1965, the day after Sister Mary disappeared. The next morning, armed with a court order, Linda joined a forensic team inside the diocesan archive. They broke open the old brass safe. Dust rolled into the air as they lifted folders yellowed with time. And there, among them, was the second letter. It bore Father O'Malley's signature. In it, he confessed partial guilt, a transgression of guidance, a breach of sanctity. Words that twisted blame without naming the crime. The last paragraph chilled her. "I have done what was necessary. May God weigh mercy more than truth." It was the closest thing to a confession Tampa would ever have. The discovery leaked to the press instantly. Protests erupted outside cathedral gates. Reporters called it the letter of absolution, framing O'Malley as both accuser and absolved. But Linda refused the narrative. He didn't seek forgiveness, she told one journalist. He sought escape. As public anger built, the diocese announced a fund in Sister Mary's name to support survivors of abuse and corruption within religious institutions. The city voted to rename the street beside the old parish Clement Way. For many, it was symbolic restoration, small but meaningful. That Sunday, a ceremony was held at the waterfront. The air shimmered with afternoon heat, the bay quiet except for the faint sound of waves. Hundreds gathered, holding candles in silence, while the bell of St. Gabriel's rang once every minute for 60 minutes, one for each year she'd lain beneath the earth. Each chime echoed across the water, haunting yet beautiful, forgiveness and sorrow intertwined. Linda stood among the crowd but didn't speak. She watched the faces lit by flame, the old, the young, believers and skeptics, and thought how strange redemption looked from the outside. The bells tolled, steady and relentless, until the final minutes slipped away and silence returned. As night settled, Tampa's skyline shimmered against the black bay, its reflection broken and glittering. The sound of the bell still hummed faintly in Linda's ears. She whispered to the quiet air, "You were right, sister." The bells did ring again. In that moment, the city felt lighter, as the centuries of guilt had lifted just enough for truth to breathe. And when the last flame beside the memorial guttered out, the site stood still, a cross of stone beneath the Florida moon, marking where faith had fallen and where it had finally risen again. The fire of public anger dimmed over the following weeks, leaving behind something quieter and far more enduring: reflection. Tampa had learned to say her name again without whispers, and in every church there was a pause before prayer. The past wasn't gone, but it was finally being spoken aloud. For Detective Linda Carver, though, the case refused to let go. Justice had been served in truth, not law, and that truth still felt incomplete. One humid morning, she received a thin envelope with no return address. Inside were 2 photographs. The first showed Father O'Malley standing outside the parish in 1964, his expression tight and cold. The second, more shocking, showed him beside another priest, unknown, unsmiling. On the back was a note written in sharp ink. He knew everything. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Linda stared at the line for minutes before slipping the photo into evidence. She checked church rosters from that era and eventually found a match. The second man was Father Andrew Keene, a visiting cleric from New Orleans who'd been assigned to St. Gabriel's for the summer of 1965. His record ended abruptly that same August. The church listed the reason as mission reassignment. No forwarding location was ever filed. His name had never appeared in public records again. Linda pressed the lead, tracking Keene's trail across diocesan archives. After weeks of silence, a clerk in Louisiana confirmed he died in 1982. She requested all stored correspondence from his file, and what she received chilled her. 3 letters dated weeks after Sister Mary's disappearance. In one, Keene wrote to a bishop about a grave wrongdoing buried under St. Gabriel's foundations. Another contained 3 haunting words: "I remain complicit." For Linda, it was vindication. The line Father O'Malley wrote, "He is not alone," was now proven literal. But for Tampa, reopening wounds meant reopening pain. The church's leadership begged her to keep the discovery quiet, warning that revelations without context could destroy what peace remains. She refused. Truth needed no schedule. Soon after, Linda met with the state attorney to determine how to handle the new findings. "We can't try the dead," the attorney said gently, "but we can document the sin." She nodded, feeling both victory and exhaustion. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about testimony. A special hearing was scheduled, open to the public, where Linda would present every fact uncovered, from Mary's letters to O'Malley's confession and now Keene's involvement. For 3 hours, the courthouse listened as silence became speech. Elderly parishioners wept quietly in the gallery. Journalists took notes in reverence rather than frenzy. When Linda read Mary's final words aloud, even the judge lowered his head. Afterward, a woman approached Linda outside the courthouse. She introduced herself as Margaret Nolan, once a parish student of Sister Mary. Her eyes were darkened by age, but bright with memory. "She was kind," Margaret said softly. "I remember she gave me her handkerchief once when I scraped my knee. I kept it all these years." She opened her purse and unfolded a piece of cloth, yellowed but intact, embroidered with a tiny cross. Linda took a breath. "Would you like it preserved with her case file?" Margaret shook her head. "No," she said. "I'll keep it. She saved me once. I want to keep saving her name." It was the first time Linda allowed herself to cry. In the days that followed, the city of Tampa changed in subtle ways. The ruins of St. Gabriel's became a community park, renamed Clement Memorial Garden. Its central walkway led to a marble bench engraved with one line of her journal: "Obedience without truth is not faith." Children played there every afternoon. Tourists visited with quiet awe. The place no longer felt haunted. It felt whole. But Linda wasn't done. Late one evening, while sorting her files for closure, she noticed something she'd missed: a small metal tag found with the chest, simply labeled Storage 17. She'd assumed it was an evidence marker. It wasn't. A quick search revealed St. Gabriel's had once used numbered containers for property records stored beneath the rectory. Most were destroyed years earlier. But Storage Unit 17 hadn't been. The next morning, Linda tracked it down: an old locked trunk buried deep in the diocesan basement. Inside were ledgers, marked donations, and handwritten letters from parishioners. In one, Father O'Malley had written to Keene before the disappearance. The sister's insistence grows dangerous. I will act soon. Pray she finds peace. That line ended the investigation with finality. There was nothing left to doubt. When the file closed for the last time, Tampa marked the moment not with fanfare, but with silence. The diocese placed the recovered journal on display inside a glass case at the Clement Garden Chapel. Visitors who entered stopped to read its final page, each person lingering a moment longer, as if listening for more. Months passed. Seasons shifted. And one night as summer returned, the bells of St. Gabriel's rang again across the bay, clear, steady, mournful, and proud. No one had arranged it. No ceremony, no gathering. Only the sound itself, echoing through humid air and quiet streets, the same way Sister Mary had written it might. From her apartment, Linda stood by the window, hearing each toll like a heartbeat. The city lay still beneath a blanket of stars. She smiled faintly, whispering to the distant sound, "You were right. The bells do speak." And across Tampa, that sound moved through every corner, half sorrow, half salvation, reminding all who heard it that silence could hide truth, but never forever. The air was heavy with memory, but lighter than it had ever been. The night held its final echo like a promise. The bells rang, and they did not stop. The morning the bells rang on their own, Tampa awoke to quiet disbelief. Some said it was a mechanical fault, a gust of wind, a loose mechanism. But those who had lived through the investigation didn't need an explanation. The city understood. It wasn't the church calling parishioners to prayer. It was the past acknowledging its own release. Detective Linda Carver arrived at Clement Memorial Garden just after dawn. The dew clung to the grass, and the marble bench glistened in the sunrise. She stood for a long time by the memorial stone bearing Sister Mary's name. The park was empty except for a handful of flowers, some fresh, some fading. Each had been left by someone she would never know. "They still come," she murmured. The words drifted in the wind, almost swallowed by the hum of the city waking nearby. Her superior, Captain Holt, joined her with a cup of coffee in hand. "You realize you've done more for this city than any jury ever could," he said. Linda shook her head. "Truth isn't justice," she replied quietly. "It's just what's left when justice isn't possible." He didn't argue. They stood together without speaking for several minutes, listening to the occasional clang of the bell, still echoing faintly across the bay. Then Holt cleared his throat. "The diocese contacted us. They want a final statement from you for their records, your reflection in your own words." He handed her a form. "They're calling it a historical reconciliation report." Linda took the paper but didn't answer. She didn't know how to summarize months of grief, guilt, and awakening into a paragraph that could sit neatly inside an archive. Later that evening, she sat at her desk, staring at the blank page. Her apartment was dim except for a lamp glowing over stacks of files she couldn't bring herself to put away. Rain began tapping against the windows, rhythmic and soft. In the distance, thunder rolled over the water. She began writing slowly, almost to herself. History isn't made of heroes or villains. It's made of choices. Sister Mary made hers with faith. Others made theirs with fear. Both left marks that time could not erase. But truth is stubborn. It lives in places no one thinks to look, in soil, in ink, in silence. What we found beneath the rectory was not a body. It was a voice, buried and waiting. The real crime was how long it took us to listen. She stopped there, staring at the words until her eyes blurred. Then she added one final line. "If faith means believing in what you cannot see, then justice is believing that truth, one day, will be heard." Folding the paper carefully, she placed it into an envelope and sealed it without rereading. That night, she drove through streets soaked with rain, her headlights cutting through the mist. When she reached the chapel at the Memorial Garden, the bell tower loomed above her, dark against the gray sky. Inside, the faint scent of candles and salt lingered. She laid the envelope beneath the glass case holding Sister Mary's journal, tucking it gently beneath the display label. "You started it," she whispered. You should finish it." As she turned to leave, she noticed a child kneeling at the foot of the memorial, a small girl lighting a candle with trembling fingers. Her mother stood nearby, watching silently. The flame caught, flickering weakly before settling into a steady glow. The child smiled, whispering a prayer too soft to hear. Linda hesitated at the altar door, something warm and painful rising in her chest. Maybe this, she thought, was how stories end, not with justice, but with memory. Weeks passed. The investigation remained officially closed, but visitors to the garden grew daily. Students wrote essays about the case. Historians drafted books on the ethics of silence. For many, it became more than a mystery. It was a lesson in the human capacity to fail, forgive, and begin again. The diocese announced plans to build a small education center beside the chapel, dedicated to truth-telling within faith institutions. The project would bear Sister Mary's name. When reporters asked if the church feared reopening wounds, the bishop replied softly, "Some wounds are meant to stay open. They remind us why we must not forget." As construction began that autumn, Linda attended one final service held at the chapel. The congregation was full, the air thick with incense. During the homily, the priest spoke about Sister Mary not as a martyr, but as a messenger. She was not destroyed by sin, he said, but by secrets. And it is not secrets that save souls, it is truth. When the choir began to sing, Linda closed her eyes. The sound swelled through the room, soft hymns rolling like tides. She wasn't religious, but she understood redemption in her own way. Redemption wasn't about absolution. It was about acknowledgement. After the service, she walked outside as evening painted the sky gold. The tide was low, the bay still. The memorial garden seemed brighter now, alive with laughter from families nearby. Children fed seagulls by the water, while elderly couples traced Sister Mary's name carved into the stone. The past lingered, but it no longer haunted. Linda stood by the water a long time before finally walking away. As she reached her car, the wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of the bell through the dusk. She stopped, looking back toward the chapel's silhouette against the fading light. One last time, the bell rang out, slow, deep, and certain. She smiled faintly, whispering, "Rest easy." And for the first time in 60 years, Tampa did. Months turned into a year. Tampa had returned to its rhythm, the markets alive on weekends, the bay glimmering beneath sunlight that refused to fade. Yet even as life moved forward, the story of Sister Mary Clement never really faded. Newspapers still mentioned her name. Tourists still visited the Clement Memorial Garden. And every few weeks, without pattern or warning, the bell at the chapel rang once at dusk. No one claimed credit. No one could explain it. It had simply become part of Tampa's heartbeat. Detective Linda Carver had transferred into a quieter division, community outreach, no longer homicide. Officially, she said she needed a slower pace. Unofficially, she couldn't look at death the same way anymore. Every case she touched now felt like an echo of Sister Mary, someone unheard, someone buried under indifference. She carried that awareness like a persistent hum beneath her thoughts. On a soft April morning, she received a letter at her desk. The envelope bore no return address, but the handwriting was careful, elegant. Inside was a photograph taken decades earlier, a black and white shot of a young nun smiling beside a group of children, sunlight washing her face. On the back, someone had written, "She changed everything, even for those who never met her. Thank you for helping us hear her voice." There was no signature, only a pressed white lily taped to the corner. Linda closed her eyes for a moment. It wasn't closure, not really, but something gentler. Gratitude, perhaps. Proof that the story had reached hearts far beyond the evidence. She pinned the photo to her wall and murmured, "That's enough." Outside, Tampa flourished in the spring heat. The education center dedicated to Sister Mary opened that month. Its main exhibit centered around her recovered journal. Crowds moved in respectful silence through the glass-lined halls, reading her words displayed across the walls. One line, painted in gold letters, became the centerpiece of the building. It read, "Truth is not rebellion. It is faith refusing to die. At the center of the exhibit, the glass case stood beneath a warm beam of light. Inside, surrounded by her letters, lay the silver cross once lost with her body, cleaned, restored, shimmering softly. Below it, a plaque read, Sister Mary Clement, 1938 to 1965. A life taken, a voice restored. Visitors left notes by the display. You taught us courage. You made us listen. You proved faith still matters. The exhibit became a living conversation between the past and the present, between belief and accountability. And in that exchange, Tampa found a rare kind of peace. Not denial, not forgetting, but acceptance. On opening day, Linda was invited to speak briefly. Standing before the crowd, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, journalists, and families waiting for something profound. But she didn't deliver a speech. She spoke as herself. Sister Mary didn't want fame, she said softly. She wanted decency. She wanted the truth to survive her fear. And 60 years later, we owe her that. We can't judge the past by what we know now, but we can make sure silence never wins again. Applause filled the room, modest but heartfelt. For a brief instant, Linda caught sight of a group of nuns standing near the back, their veils moving gently in the air conditioning. One of them pressed her hands together and nodded toward her. It was small, almost imperceptible, yet it felt like absolution. That evening, the city celebrated with quiet dignity. Candles lined the walkway near the bay, flickering like reflections of the stars above. Musicians played slow hymns on acoustic guitars, mixing sacred melodies with folk rhythm. There was no sermon, no dramatic speech, just community, gathered in recognition of how far truth had traveled. As the night deepened, Linda found herself walking alone along the pier. The breeze brushed her hair, carrying the sharp salt scent of the Gulf. She saw her reflection swaying beneath the waves, merging with the lights of the city behind her. For the first time, she allowed herself to exhale without that familiar tension in her chest. The bell at the Memorial Garden rang once more, steady and resonant. She turned toward the sound, smiling. "Still talking, aren't you?" she whispered into the wind. Somewhere, in that silence between the chimes, she swore she heard faint laughter, kind, unburdened, free. The case had begun as a tragedy, but it ended as something else entirely. A promise that even in institutions built from silence, truth found cracks to enter through. Sister Mary hadn't sought to defy her faith. She had embodied it. Her courage, revealed decades later, had done what sermons could not. It reminded people that belief without honesty is hollow. As the night wore on, Linda sat on a weathered bench facing the water, letting the steady hum of the city wrap around her. Lights flickered on distant boats. Waves brushed the shore in soft repetition. Tampa no longer felt haunted. It felt human, flawed, compassionate, awake. Before leaving, she pulled a small notebook from her jacket pocket, the same one she had carried since reopening the case. On its final blank page, she wrote, "For Mary, for every truth that took too long to speak." She closed it carefully, tucking it beneath her arm, and began walking back toward the faint glow of the chapel. Behind her, the sound of the bay whispered against the rocks, endless and unwavering. Ahead, the bell waited in silence, ready to ring whenever the city forgot what it had learned. And that night, as stars settled quietly above the water, Tampa remembered. By the following winter, the story of Sister Mary Clement had stretched far beyond Tampa. Documentaries, newspaper series, podcasts, each retold her story through a different lens, connecting her courage to an era when silence ruled faith and institutions guarded reputation more fiercely than truth. But among all the voices that echoed her memory, none carried the depth of those who had known her only through the traces she left behind. The handwriting, the honesty, the faith that refused to break. Detective Linda Carver watched the growing attention with mixed feelings. She'd attended too many crime scenes to feel comfortable with fame attached to pain. When journalists asked for interviews, she declined. "The story isn't mine," she would say. "I just turned the soil." Still, she couldn't help noticing how the city had changed in the aftermath. The Clement Memorial Garden became a place of quiet pilgrimage. People visited not just to honor a murdered nun, but to confront their own silence. Teachers brought students there, asking them to write letters about moments they stayed quiet when they should have spoken up. Families prayed at the memorial together. The statue of Sister Mary, added later, carved in smooth marble, stood facing the bay, her eyes cast toward the horizon. A single open hand stretched forward, as if offering both mercy and warning. On a cool January morning, Linda returned to the site after several months away. The bell tower rose above her, sunlight glinting off its metal frame. The air was unusually crisp, carrying the faint songs of seagulls. She walked slowly along the path lined with lilies until she reached the bench beneath the plaque bearing Sister Mary's name. Someone had left a folded piece of paper held down by a small cross pendant. She picked it up, hesitated, and opened it. It read in delicate handwriting, "I am a priest now. My father served under O'Malley. He carried guilt all his life for never speaking out. Sister Mary's story gave him peace before he passed. Thank you for giving her back to us." Linda held the letter close, her throat tightening. The cycle of silence had finally been broken, not by force, but by example. That was the real victory. Not punishment, not confession, understanding. Later that day, she drove north toward the convent where Sister Mary had taken her vows. The building still stood, a modest structure near Savannah, weathered by salt air and time. The sisters who lived there greeted her warmly, recognizing her from the news. They invited her into their small chapel, where a single candle flickered beside an image of the Virgin Mary. Beneath it hung a new plaque inscribed with simple gold lettering, "In memory of our sister, who spoke when silence was safer." As they prayed together, Linda didn't recite words. She simply closed her eyes and let the stillness fill her lungs. In that silence, she didn't hear tragedy anymore. She heard continuation, the idea that truth once spoken never truly dies. Afterward, one of the elderly sisters guided her to a wooden pew near the window. The woman's voice was thin but resolute. "We used to think holiness meant obedience," she said. "Now we know it means honesty. Sister Mary taught us that. She taught us even in death." When Linda left the convent that evening, the sky was smeared with pale pink clouds. She stopped before getting into her car and looked back at the chapel steeple. The bell inside it was small, identical in tone to the one in Tampa. She imagined its sound carried on the same wind, connecting the two cities. Two truths born under the same sky. Months drifted by peacefully. The education center flourished, drawing visitors from across the country. Sister Mary's writings were published in a small volume, Asterisk Testament of Faith Asterisk, that became required reading in theology schools and journalism programs alike. People began quoting her final words as a reminder that faith without courage is incomplete. For Linda, the chapter was closing. Her retirement approached, and her desk drawers grew lighter as she turned in her files. On her final day in the precinct, she found herself alone in the office, the late afternoon sunlight spilling across her folders. She took one last look at the evidence box marked Clement case, now sealed permanently. Resting her hand on the lid, she whispered, "Thank you," and left it behind. That evening, she drove to the bay one last time. The air was cool, touched by salt and memory. The water reflected the city lights like fragments of a broken mirror, beautiful, imperfect, alive. She sat on the edge of the pier, her reflection swaying among the ripples. The city skyline glowed behind her, but her eyes turned toward the horizon. The bell from the memorial garden rang out once, steady and low. She smiled faintly. The sound reminded her that endings were never truly ends, just continuations waiting for someone else to listen. Above her, gulls cut through the fading light, their cries echoing across the bay. Behind her, the streets carried laughter instead of grief. In that moment, Tampa felt whole. The darkness that had once cloaked its history no longer felt like a stain, but a shadow cast by light. What remained was balance, the coexistence of faith and truth, regret and grace. Sister Mary's story had stopped being a mystery. It had become a mirror. Linda rose, brushing the salt from her hands, and walked back toward the city lights. Each step felt lighter than the last. The breeze carried a quiet hum, as if the bay itself were whispering a hymn. And there, beneath the same sky that once concealed sin, forgiveness finally lingered, tender and enduring, an invisible hand guiding the world gently forward. Spring returned to Tampa in a slow bloom of color. The city felt lighter now, as though an invisible weight had lifted after decades of silence. The Clement Memorial Garden glowed beneath warm sunlight, its flowers alive with bees and soft wind. What had once been a graveyard of secrets was now a sanctuary of truth. Detective Linda Carver, retired for nearly a year, walked down the familiar stone path toward Sister Mary's statue. The sound of the bay was calm, the laughter of children blended with the whistle of the breeze. She carried 2 lilies in one hand, a quiet ritual she never abandoned. Every visit reminded her not of death, but of endurance. No case ever truly ends, she'd once told her captain. It just changes form. This one had changed everything. The marble figure of Sister Mary rose graceful and steady, face turned toward the sun. At her feet, hundreds of offerings lay, rosaries, folded notes, photographs, flowers faded and fresh alike. Someone had tied a ribbon around the wrist of the statue's hand. On it was written, "Truth never dies." Linda smiled. "You'd like that motto," she whispered. She sat at the nearby bench, the one facing both the statue and the water. A group of students gathered under the trees for their annual remembrance reading. They were children, none old enough to understand the world of 1965, but they spoke her words as if they'd lived them. The youngest girl's voice trembled just slightly as she read aloud, "If I disappear, tell them it was not by choice." Silence fell across the crowd. Even the wind seemed to still. Then came the rustle of applause, gentle but full of emotion. What had once been a confession of fear had become, all these years later, a declaration of strength. Linda felt tears rise but didn't brush them away. They belonged to the story as much as anything else. After the ceremony ended, a reporter approached her, a woman in her 30s, not even born when Sister Mary vanished. "Detective Carver, how does it feel, seeing all this now?" she asked quietly. "Knowing what you uncovered changed so much." Linda thought for a moment before answering. "It's not my story," she said softly. "It's hers. I just happened to hear it before the world did." The young woman smiled. "Do you think she'd be proud?" "I think she already knows," Linda replied, gaze drifting toward the bell tower. The reporter left, and Linda remained, resting her hand lightly on the bench. In her bag sat a folded letter she had written months ago, a letter to the next generation of detectives who might one day find themselves chasing a truth nobody wanted to see. It began simply, "Remember, silence has accomplices. Don't be one of them." The sun dipped lower, turning the bay gold. Across the water, seagulls arced and vanished into distant light. For once, Tampa didn't feel haunted. It felt wiser. A small boy ran past, laughing as he chased butterflies through the garden. His footprints brushed over the engraved words on the walkway. "Truth endures." Linda watched him with quiet amusement, realizing that living memory was the real miracle. The dead didn't ask for vengeance, they asked to be remembered. At sunset, she rose and walked toward the pier. The horizon glowed with orange and violet, its reflection rippling like stained glass upon the water. She breathed in the warm salt air, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Peace isn't absence, it's understanding." Then came the sound, a bell ringing softly through the wind. Only one tone, but it lingered long enough to stir every heart in earshot. Tourists turned toward the tower, some smiling, some blinking through quiet tears. No one ever discovered what triggered it. The automatic system had long been disabled, but no one needed to. The city understood. The echo reached the bay, rolling across the water's surface, folding into the breath of the waves. Linda stood perfectly still, listening until the final note faded. Then she turned toward the city lights coming to life behind her. "You can rest now," she murmured. "They know." The sea whispered in reply. The last light of day spilled gold over the chapel's stained windows, reflecting back one more shimmer of promise. And as dusk settled fully over Tampa, the bell tolled once more, not as morning, but as memory, steady and forgiving, echoing through a city that finally learned how to listen.
For years, these cases were forgotten. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Here we reopen the files, reveal the evidence, and give a voice to those who were silenced. Subscribe now and step inside the archive where time, lies, and justice finally meet. Because every secret eventually speaks.